So thank you so much for being here. Today we are having our second webinar of the Financial History Network webinar series. We are very pleased to welcome Renato, Raffaele, Amoroso, who will be presenting the paper, The European Investment Bank and its Extraordinary Intervention for the Mezzogiorno, 1958-1973. So Renato is a postdoctoral researcher in economic history at the University of Naples, Federico II. He obtained a PhD in civil economy at Lunza University. He conducts research in economic history and the history of economic thought. Amoroso was a research fellow at the European University Institute in 2021. His works include as co-author Cassa per il Mezzogiorno, Europa e Regioni nelle stazioni della industrializzazione, and La povertà nel pensiero di Anthony Genovese. So thank you so much, Renato, for coming. You have 30 minutes for your presentation. I'm gonna start sharing your slides right now, and then we're gonna have 30 minutes for questions. So I guess everyone can see the slide. Is that all right?
Yeah.
So please
Yes.
go on. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula, for the presentation, and thank you all of the organizers for inviting me and for accepting my proposal. So I'm very happy to present this study here, which is the European Investment Bank and its extraordinary intervention for the Mezzogiorno in the historical period from 1958 to 1973, which was, I should say, part of my PhD research, which I'm still deepening right now in my postdoctoral studies. So actually this presentation deals with the topic of extraordinary intervention for the Mezzogiorno, trying to placing the measure adopted by the Italian government, also the development strategy, we should say, employed in southern Italy within the broader international political and economic context, and also the theoretical debate on growth strategies in underdeveloped areas. The point is that after the Second World War, economic analysis and paid increasing attention to the economic condition of underdeveloped areas, and the Mezzogiorno was identified internationally as a test bed region to implement a significant number of pilot projects, we can say, that were also financed by international capital. This approach was actually evident, for example, in writings of Paul Rosenstein-Rodan, which was one of the main theorists of the big push theory of the balanced growth theory for economic development. And is evident, for example, in his paper, The International Development of Economically Backward Areas, in which the Polish author stressed the importance of promoting Eastern and Southeastern Europe development programs because, as he said, it is in many respects the most fruitful and interesting field of action for that period of political and economic development, because the solution for the economic development problem can be envisaged within a lifetime of one generation. It was, I'm just quoting Rodan right now because this explains why the Mezzogiorno in southern Italy was one of the international areas in which a lot of projects were realized, financed by international capital in this period. As we all know, as early as the 1950s, the Italian government, through the establishment of Cassa per il Mezzogiorno, had experimented with financing strategies and deployed increasing resources with the aim of creating the pre-industrialization conditions in the Mezzogiorno. And actually, the problem was that the situation of southern regions appeared to be critical when compared to levels of development already achieved in other European economic community countries. So actually, we are dealing with an intervention which took place in two phases. In the first phase, the extraordinary intervention was mainly financed by the World Bank with a lot of loans which was granted to the Cassa per il Mezzogiorno in Italy, and to the Italian government actually. And the World Bank represented an essential international reference, both from a theoretical and also a financial point of view. And from 1958 onwards, actually, the European Investment Bank became the main financer of projects in Italy, bringing also about a gradual, we can say, evolution in the financing strategy, and so in the theoretical reference of the extraordinary intervention. So precisely in order to grasp, we can say, the effects of the changes in the international political and economic context of the financing also promoted in the Mezzogiorno, this presentation would like to deal with three essential themes, which are identifying the theoretical background for the financing provided in the Mezzogiorno, then describing financing strategy employed by the EIB, the European Investment Bank, and finally interpreting the financing data to better understand the essential drivers of the financing strategy. If you can switch to slide number 2, Paula, please. So from this perspective, it is necessary to look at the theoretical background in order to understand how financing strategies were structured in the area of the Mezzogiorno. This exercise actually to answer the following question, which is how do we finance development? And there was a main debate in the 50s and 60s in this period. So this kind of debate essentially focused in the 50s and the 60s on the comparison between two major theories, which was the balanced growth and the imbalanced growth theory. So the research question is to what extent the EIB intervention in the Mezzogiorno actually followed the theories of balanced or imbalanced growth. And the analysis of data suggests the following thesis that I try to demonstrate that within the general framework of public intervention inspired by the big push theory, the EIB has implemented policies that also comply with the Hirschman model of imbalanced growth. And the research methodology was mainly based upon archived data policy and policy search, theoretical background, and interpretation of data in light of theoretical background. These sentences I quoted here really inspired me in carrying out this work, which is clarification of direct experience is the sole justification of any concept. The starting point of this is analytical observation of the elements of that experience, which is a sentence from Whitehead quoted by Albert Hirschman in its first edition, in the preface of his first edition of 1958 of the Strategy of Economic Development. So let's try to go through a brief overview of balanced and imbalanced growth theories. Next slide, please, Paula. So as we all know, we can look to balanced growth theory both from the supply side and the demand side. Looking at the supply side, what the main authors of this theory point out is that supply or production in underdeveloped countries is low.
Recording in progress.
The reason behind this is that saving in these countries is low because of low income, and low savings result in low investments. So we are actually dealing with the vicious circle of poverty theorized by Ragnar Nurks. And the solution proposed is that it is imperative to increase investment in order to increase demand. But according to this theory, investment will increase when the entrepreneurs will get impetus to invest. So in other words, their products will sell and they will earn profit. The essential point is that several industries should be set up simultaneously. So it is then argued that also investment in social overhead capital, which stands for SOC, is fundamental and indivisible. And it must precede other investment and account for 30–40% of total investment. As Lewis, which is one of the main theories of balanced growth, said, balanced growth means that all sectors of the economy should grow simultaneously so as to keep a proper balance between industry and agriculture, and between production for home consumption and production for export. The truth, said Lewis, is that all sectors should be expanded simultaneously. Looking then at the demand side, so next slide, please. We can, what was pointed out, what was argued is that in underdeveloped countries, people have low purchasing power because of their low income, and their demand is also low. So low demand results in less expansion of markets. Again, the solution proposed is that several industries should be developed simultaneously so that all can be the customers mutually of each other and the products of all can be sold. So we are mainly talking about complementarity of demand. That is one of the main essential points of balanced growth theory, as pointed out, for example, by Rodan in his famous shoe factory example. Talking about workers, for example, he wrote, they would not spend all of their additional income on shoes. There is no easy solution of creating in this way an additional market. The risk of not finding a market reduces the incentive to invest, and the shoe factory investment project will be probably abandoned. So this is a brief overview of balanced growth theory. But what about the unbalanced growth theory, which had Albert Hirschman as one of the main theories and one of the main authors pointing out some points, some essential features of this theory. So Albert Hirschman analysis actually underlined that investment in strategic sectors of the economy is necessary instead of a big push of all the sector simultaneously. So as he said, to a large extent, industrialization penetrates country in this way through enterprises that perform final retouching to semi-finished industrial products imported from abroad. And Ishman pointed out that this tendency has many advantages because it provides an investment outlet for small amounts of capital that will hardly be available and makes it possible the launching of industrial enterprise without the heavy risk that exists in underdeveloped countries. So what is really needed, according to Ishman, is to increase investment capacity and not just the amount of investment. So as Ishman said, the real scarce resource is capacity and not capital or natural resources. Investment capacity mainly deals, according to Ishman, with the capacity to perceive investment opportunities. And so it is an essential condition for investment to occur, actually. Then two other main points underlined by Ishman are the importance of linkage effects and backward induction, arguing thus for the need also to promote development through imbalances, which is one of the main point of Ishman theories. If you can please switch to the next slide, Paul. As Ishman pointed out, an imbalance elicits a movement of expansion that in turn triggers a similar imbalance. So if the development authority, as Ishman said, succeeds in starting and sustaining such a mechanism, economic and political leaders would nothing to do but follow its development as spectators. So actually investment and this mechanism of linkage effects and backward induction would actually work automatically in order to promote development. What Ishman pointed out, for example, is that the invaluable property of investment is that of eliciting other investment through complementarities and external economies. And this is an invaluable aid to development. But in order to better understand also the debate which took place in the 50s and the 60s on about these two main theories for development, I pointed out also some critiques made by Ishman to the balanced growth theory in the next slide. He analyzed mainly 4 points, we can say. First one is the strategies beyond the resource of most poor countries, because tight market, poor ability to invest and manage enterprises don't allow to simultaneously promote a large number of investment. Second point is dualistic model, because balanced growth, according to Ishman, claims to establish an entirely modern sector while leaving out the traditional one. Third point is the centralization of investment decision. If the market, according to Ishman, is deemed unable to perform some tasks like promoting a large number of investment, we cannot say if the state may necessarily be able to do so. And last point is external economies and diseconomies, because centralization of investment as proposed by the big push model only allows external economies to be internalized, leaving out what Ishman called diseconomies. So what Ishman said is one of the most curious aspects of the theory is the way in which it combines and defeats this attitude towards the possibilities of underdeveloped economies with a completely unrealistic confidence in their creative capacities. And he follows, it is precisely from a population that it is assumed to be incapable of doing any of these things and should therefore be absolutely indifferent to change that sufficient entrepreneurial and administrative capacity are expected to arise, such as to launch at the same time a complete series of enterprise. So after having pointed out, we can say, to what was the debate about the main development theories which were debating and which were confronting themselves in this period, we can look to the extraordinary interventionary development strategy implemented in the Mezzogiorno in this wider, we can say, international economic and political context. The intervention can actually be divided into 2 major eras. The first one is from 1950 to 1957, with a large investment in social overhead capital, with a great support from the World Bank through the financing of the so-called impact loans for an overall development program which was presented by the Italian government to the World Bank. We are mainly talking about 8 loans granted to Italian government and Cassa per il Mezzogiorno from 1951 to 1965 for a total amount of $400 million. So this first half of the intervention was then mainly inspired, we can say, to the Rodan model of balanced growth. A second half of the intervention took place between 1957 and 1973. It was mainly dealing with industrialization with a great support from the European Investment Bank, which had some characteristics, some mainly features: the financing of targeted projects, private capital partnership, and requests for project submissions, which were deemed as essential to apply for financing to the European Investment Bank. Another important point was also the support of to development of SMEs, of small and medium enterprise, which we'll analyze actually later. So the second half of the intervention was mainly influenced by Ishman's theory of unbalanced growth. The first meeting of the EIB Board of Governors actually set the guidelines for the European Investment Bank strategy. I pointed out this in the next slide, with the aim of promoting, as it is written in the minutes of the board, la réalisation d'une véritable communauté, which is the realization of a true community. So three main goals were set for the bank. First, prioritizing less favored regions and financing projects of common interest, modernization and reconversion. Second, financing large-scale determined projects and not overall development programs. And third point, collaborate with local banks. So some strict banking criteria were set by Campilli, who was the first president of the European Investment Bank, as for international credit and demonstrated profitability of projects financed by the European Investment Bank. So let's try to look to an overview of the European Investment Bank strategy in the Mezzogiorno before deepening actually the analysis in the following slides. It is actually possible to divide the EIB strategy into three periods in the Mezzogiorno. First period from 1958 to 1963, with the financing of core sectors, also in collaboration with the World Bank, the support to development of industrial clusters, and a lot of capital-intensive investments. Second period from 1964 to 1968, with an increased intervention and new local partners in southern Italy, which were regional development bodies and institutions, ISAP and INSUD, which were two main financing institutions for enterprises in Italy, in Mezzogiorno, and financial companies. So main feature of this period is an intensifying of public-private partnership. And the third period took place from 1968 to 1973 with the financing of global loans, which we will analyze later, support to SMEs, and the elaboration of new perspective of interventions. So in the first period, the EIB offered, as we said, a large support to the development of industrial ports, industrial clusters in southern Italy. So according to the big push theory. So grants awarded for big enterprise, for example, in Pasquasia, in Taranto, in the steel sector, and Pomigliano d'Arco in the automotive sectors, which are some famous and really active industries also now in this area, account for this strategy employed by the EIB. So the European Investment Bank also supported some large infrastructure projects like, for example, the Mercure plant, which is a thermal power plant, and Sincat, in cooperation with the World Bank. What is important to say is that the financing of these projects, which were also the first implemented by the EIB in Italy, was split 50-50 with the World Bank. And so this was, we can say, to all intents and purposes, an handover. So the World Bank would only provide a new loan to Italy in 1965, the last one. And from 1958 onwards, the European Investment Bank became the main international funder of development policies in the Mezzogiorno. From a technical point of view, the loans granted by the World Bank to Italy, and also the first loans granted by the European Investment Bank, were indirect loans. So they were granted to the Cassa per il Mezzogiorno with a guarantee from the Italian state, actually. So the Cassa per il Mezzogiorno was an essential, we can say, technical reference for the EIB and for the World Bank in the implementation of projects. And the close contacts with the international context and also the technical preparation and the technical knowledge of Italian technicians thus confirmed the effectiveness of the institutional, let's say, architecture behind the extraordinary intervention for the Mezzogiorno, which succeeded in attracting significant foreign capital, as also shown by the data that we will comment on below. And some critical aspects of the EIB strategy in this period were highlighted by members of board of directors. Three main points were highlighted. The first one is that financing was granted to large groups rationalizing plants, but decision-making was still located outside southern Italy. Then large funding was granted in basic sectors that didn't meet local consumption needs, which was one of the main goals of the development program of the Italian government. And large investment finally was devoted to capital-intensive production, leading to a low absorption of unemployed or underemployed labor. the role of regional lending institution actually was fundamental. Namely, we are talking about Iswemer, Irfis, and Cheese, which were three main regional lending institutions in southern Italy in 50s and the 60s. Their role was fundamental, and an example is essential to demonstrate this, because in 1962, Iswemer was granted by the EIB a large number of loans to support a group of enterprise in Sardinia, with the aim of, we can say, giving birth to an entire value chain benefiting of localization of these production plants near to the sea. But during the meeting of the board of directors of the EIB, an intense debate took place about the need to localize new enterprises in Sardinia, because it was argued that Sardinia, it is an island in the Mediterranean, was not an efficient localization because of its position in the Mediterranean. So the decision of the EIB was motivated as follows. I don't know, can I read French, or is it better to try to translate?
I think that's fine. You can go on.
Okay. The decision actually of the EIB was motivated by saying il peut y avoir deux conceptions en matière de localisation des activités économiques. L'une tend à la division du travail la plus rationnelle en développant les activités industrielles là où les conditions économiques sont les plus favorables. L'autre répond au souci de stimuler l'industrialisation des régions encore insuffisamment développées. So actually this was a main point in the definition of the EIB strategy and the EIB approach to development in the Mezzogiorno, because the decision was motivated saying actually that development of less favored regions was essential and more important than efficient market localization, giving so to the EIB, we can say, a great political role in promoting development, rather than just a market and economic-led role in employing in realizing development programs for the Mezzogiorno. So an intense debate also arose with the approval of grant to the Cementeria Barletta, which was another interesting case analyzed for the EIB in Puglia, because it was specifically argued that enterprise financed by the EIB were dependent on outsourced decision-making centers, that grants were allowing vertical integration with plants located in the north or abroad Italy. So the fear was that the South would only become a production center for semi-finished products and not ready for local consumption. Then it was argued that fields created were outside local business environments and products did not meet local demand. And the conclusion was that the fear was that strategy employed by the EIB was actually leading to cancelling the agglomerative effects of industrial poles and clusters. Finally, a lot of investments were also planned in this period in Lazio region, which is in center Italy, in order to determine a better resettlement of workforce migrating from the Mezzogiorno to Rome. What happened in the second period of EIB strategy in the Mezzogiorno? Some macroeconomic tensions took place in Italy from 1963 to 1964, which led to a government intervention to intensify public support to development. So we have a wage shock, negative balance of payments led mainly by increased demand for import goods. And the reaction to the crisis was rationalizing plan for large companies and few opportunities for SMEs who were not able to face the shock and could not easily actually reorganize their production. So the Italian government intensified its intervention also by setting up, we can say, new local institutions, which were ISAP for the incubation of 36 enterprise and companies in the Mezzogiorno, the INSUD, which was mainly working with foreign capitals, and the Ajinomoto's case is interesting because it led capital from Japan, with the collaboration of EIB, creating 264 jobs in Puglia in the chemical sector. And then the collaboration with financial companies, because we have the SME and SIP, which were mainly active in the food and telecommunication sectors. And EIB granted 9 loans and over 200 million of unit of account to these companies in Italy. The support to SMEs became more and more important because, as we said, large industry were succeeding in facing the crisis, but a large support was needed for SMEs starting from 1968. The EIB granted a large amount of loans to small and medium enterprise. However, this was not the first experience of the EIB with small and medium enterprises, because some loans were already approved in the 60s with the aim of supporting production sites in labor-intensive sectors. 3 main examples are the Monti project in 1960 in Pescara, the team that is invest projects in Sicily in Patti in 1961, which were medium-sized enterprise, labor-intensive and highly specialized enterprise. And this, once again, highlighted the essential role of regional institutes because their deep-rooted presence and knowledge of the local business fabric actually allowed a better allocation for EIB financing in Italy. But in 1968, as we said, given the consequences of the crisis, the support to SMEs became essential in order to promote new employment opportunities. I read a question, I don't know, maybe I should answer later.
Yes, I think we can take it later, and taking this opportunity to let you know you have 5 minutes.
Okay, so I was highlighting here the main features of these global loans approved by the European Investment Bank with initial and single board approval, the regular reporting by the Direction Committee of the bank, 12 years duration, including a 3 years exemption period for the restitution of the loans, and the first global loans which was granted to Weimar in the Mezzogiorno, so which this confirmed the Mezzogiorno as a test bed for innovative cooperation, economic cooperation policies in the European economic community. And this proposal actually underlined the importance of support to SMEs because they were a complement to cluster policy leading to a better distribution of industrial activities on the territory. So the SMEs actually allowed to absorb unemployed workforce in the labor-intensive production, while industrial poles were mainly promoting capital-intensive industry. And support to SMEs was in this sense compliant a bit to the Ishman model, as we said, because the Direction Committee, I highlighted this in the next slide, the Direction Committee pointed out that SMEs promoted a spread initiative and facultative development, which can be considered two fundamental variables of the imbalanced growth model, but we can deepen this question, this theme later. If we can go to, I don't know, slide number 18, as time is running out, I highlighted some fundamental data of EIB financing in Mezzogiorno, which accounts for 60% of EIB activity in member countries, and Mezzogiorno was awarded 80% of these funds. So actually the 50% of total EIB intervention in member countries was granted to the Mezzogiorno, leading to the creation of more than 56,000 jobs in southern Italy. And what is important to underline, next slide, is that 57% of these projects was accounts for industrial interventions, thus supporting 200 industrial initiatives and creating 53,000 jobs in the secondary sector. Last two slides as an ending to interpret the EIB strategy in Italy and say to what theoretical model it suits actually the most. First point is timeline of public intervention in Italy. At first, we said social overhead capital and support with, from the World Bank, and then the support to direct productive activities, and EIB was essential. So we can say actually there was a change in the way of thinking about development and the strategy adopted. At first, large development programs and social overhead capital is financed, a la Rodan, we can say, then determined projects with private capital participation for the secondary sector and SMEs, maybe a la Ishman. The timeline of EIB financing was essential also because at first, a few large projects in the basic and capital intensive sectors, then support for private SMEs in intermediate and high-tech sectors. So the idea was to open up new horizons on the production and consumption level with less competition to the traditional sector that could modernize maybe in the meantime. The focus on investment capacity, because the request to prepare and present projects with demonstrated profitability develops actually entrepreneurial skills and local decision making. As Ishman pointed out, development technique is discovered during development and through knowledge transfer. Then the backward induction idea is mainly employed by the European Investment Bank because capital intensive and technology intensive tech sectors were mainly supported by the EIB. So the idea was that of imbalanced development through the financing of direct productive activities, thus activating backward induction effects in the open market and local production. Since 1968, global loans started to finance intermediate sector and SMEs with a high technology use. Last slide, 4 main points: the decentralization of investment decision, because the EIB interventions did not emphasize the entrepreneurial role of the state, but aimed at developing private entrepreneurial capacity and investment capacity, as Ishman pointed out. Then the type of investment promoted with global loans, as we said, the SMEs and last industry were essential, because projects that can provide for effective use of limited capital present in underdeveloped areas were mainly financed by the EIB. The role of foreign capital, again, quoting Ishmael, obviously, capital can only be devoted to well-defined projects, but without the certainty of being able to obtain from within or without funds, underdeveloped countries will probably not incur the considerable expenses required by economic and technical planning. So the main role of the EIB was that of ensuring the presence of this international capital, also to make public institutions and regional institution body to incur this effort in economic and technical planning. And finally, last point, it's worth, according to me, to meditate on this EIB experiment within the experiment of European integration, because with its structure as an autonomous institution, the EIB aims actually to limit the polarization of development and at the same time to strengthen the propagation effects, we can say, that can also occur between states, not only between regions. It was a main point analyzed and stressed out by Ishman, talking about polarization and propagation effects in the development process, which can occur between regions. When we talk of propagation effects, when we talk of relationship about states, polarization is most probably actually to occur. So in this sense, the EIB acted almost as a regional development agency in a context of political integration between states and not between regions. So in a sense, it succeeded in mitigating the polarization effects of development by actually strengthening the propagation ones, albeit between states and not between regions. And this was possible actually on the basis of the broadly shared goals of economic solidarity and cooperation, which were pointed out in the European Economic Community Treaty of Rome and also in the protocol concerning Italy that was attached actually to the treaty. So thank you for attention. Hope to be on time with the presentation, and I'm open to questions and clarification.
Thank you so much, Raffaele, for this great presentation. So we have one question already. Bernardo asks on the chat, how do you reconcile the ideas of Hirschman with those of Mazzucato?
Oh, actually, this point of my research, I'm not able to answer the questions. This question is not one of the main author I've deepened in my study.
So can we open perhaps? Sorry,
sure.
Renato. Go ahead.
Sure.
Perhaps other colleagues will have questions. You can raise your hand or just type your question on chat. So while our colleagues elaborate on the questions, I have one. Actually, I have two. I don't know if they are actually relevant to the story you develop. But the first thing that I was thinking is whether they produced some sort of analysis before they granted these loans to determine what were the most productive in the sense of the best regions to accept or receive this project. So I'm thinking whether they produce indicators on employment, inflation, how they produce this knowledge about localizing these opportunities for development. And the other question, which is about knowledge transfer, but within the context of the Cold War. So Italy was part of another huge project of economic growth, the Marshall Plan. So I was thinking whether there were some lessons that would learn and implemented given this previous experience with reconstruction, not development, right? And there's also this epistemic shift from reconstructing to developing the regions. So I don't know if perhaps we can add Mattia's question before you answer mine.
Sure. Thanks.
Go ahead, Mattia.
Yes, thank you very much. And congratulations, Renato, for your work. Very interesting presentation. I had just one question for you, which I mean has to do also with. I'm sorry, maybe it's I should present myself to the audience as well. I'm a PhD student in political science at Sciences Po in Paris. I work on the Italian central bank in a period that is very close and sometimes also coincides with Renato's thesis. And in fact, my question is related to this. And I wanted to ask to Renato, if I understand correctly, you are trying to test whether, I mean, one of the goals is trying to test whether this intervention of the IB in Italy has to do more with the Hirschman model or more with the balanced growth model. My question has to do with the economic crisis in the 60s in Italy, like the economic conjuncture in 63, 64. And I would like to ask you whether do you see a link between the implementation of, let's say, Hirschman-based model of economic development in Italy and the drivers behind the economic conjuncture in Italy. So the 63, 64 downturn of the balance of payments and the problem of how to actually continue the process of economic development in a situation in which the situation of balance of payments in Europe were let's say, in trouble. And then the second part of this question is, how do you reconcile this story with these actors and with institutions that you are looking at with other actors and institutions which played a great role in economic development, as for example, the central bank, the Italian central bank. So if you can elaborate a bit on this, it would be also very helpful for my own project. And thank you very much for your talk.
Thanks. Can I proceed those answering the questions?
Yes, please.
Starting from the first one. So what kind of studies were actually elaborated in order to how can we say to decide whether it was the best region to invest and to accept this financing? I should say first point is that the extraordinary intervention in Italy began actually in 1950. So a great program of pre-industrialization was already in course of being realized in Italy in that period, and was mainly devoted to the financing of southern Italy, which was intended as one of the most central region in the Mediterranean area as for point of economic development, actually. And behind this choice of implementing the intervention and behind the entire institutional architecture of the intervention, there was a lot of study, a lot of attempt to measure development and indicators of development for the Mezzogiorno. One main institution which was devoted to do so was the SVIMEZ, which is the Industrial Association for the Association for Industrial Development in Mezzogiorno, that elaborated a lot of analysis on economic indicators for the Mezzogiorno. Actually, the analysis stressed out and underlined that Mezzogiorno and southern Italy was one of the largest area in the European Economic Community, with a number of inhabitants which was maybe larger than other European states, but its indicators of development were actually testing as one of the less developed region, maybe we cannot say in the world, but the international Western context from the economic point of view. One of the main, I can say, personalities which was in this kind of studies for the SVIMEZ was Pasquale Saraceno, for example, who was one of the main economists in this period, one of the most famous meridionalists, or the economist which was interested in the problem of southern Italy, and he produced a lot of studies on economic indicators for in order to account for the Mezzogiorno to be one of the test bed areas for economic international cooperation, starting from the 50s, actually. So both the reconstruction and then the development period of economic international cooperation. Then also the EIB had an entire section was devoted to produce studies to how can I say this, to study, I don't know, to give some information about in the economic indicators and economic conditions of the areas and the regions they were financing and supporting, and also to evaluate the impact of the financing implemented on site. And one of the main Italian personality, who was one of the main character in the debate which took place before the implementation of the EIB, and for also the writing, the drafting of the statute of the EIB, was Gian Domenico Sertoli. After being, I don't know, the chair of the ad hoc group which was in charge of drafting the statute, he was appointed as the secretary of the study section, we can say, in the EIB. So a lot of Italian personalities were linked to this experience of setting up the EIB and setting up the development strategy implied by the EIB. As a test bed, we can say also the first two presidents of the EIB were two Italian people, Pietro Campilli and Pari de Formentini, and they were actually two personalities which were linked with the problems of Mezzogiorno. Campilli was a former minister for Mezzogiorno in Italy, and Formentini was one of the main personalities also linked to the Italian central bank. This maybe answer a bit also the question posed by Mattia. Then what's the link? The second question was, what's the link? Another thing I would say about studying and internationally choosing which was the most which area fit the most to receive development is taking into consideration that in the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, which was established after the Second World War and operated also till the establishment, till the signing of the Treaty of Rome, there was an intense debate on development. And main areas which were taken into consideration were southern Italy from an international point of view, and then Turkey and Greece. And a lot of debate took place in the meetings of the United Nations Commission for Europe, and Italian personalities were always main characters in this debate, and they pointed out a lot of times the economic conditions, the less favored economic condition of Mezzogiorno. And what is important to underline is that, for example, a lot of this debate was actually also important for the drafting of the Treaty of Rome, because after the signing of the Treaty of Rome, we said Italy, Greece, and Turkey were the main underdeveloped areas in geographical Europe, we can say, in this period. And with the signing of the Treaty of Rome, the protocol concerning Italy was attached to the treaty, and it was a protocol in which the signatory states, they recognized the intervention realized by the government, and also recognized the international success the intervention was gaining with the support from the World Bank. And after the setting up of the EIB and the European Social Fund, which were the main two institutions intended to promote social and economic development in the European Economic Community in this period, the first two states to be associated with the community were actually Turkey and Greece. And the association to the European Community in this period mainly was about receiving funds from the European Economic Community, and the main institution devoted to grant funds to other states was the EIB, actually, was the European Investment Bank. So from an international point of view, from the debate point of view, this central role of Italy, Greece, and Turkey, so the Mediterranean area in the European context, was also proved by this decision, maybe dealing with what was the attention from the point of view of studying underdeveloped areas. Then the two questions by Mattia. The first one is if the economic crisis in if the economic crisis which took place from 1963-1964 in Italy was a driver in this maybe shifting the international reference model for the EIB? I would say yes, for some reasons. Two main reasons, because the huge wage shock that took place in Italy led to an increase of production costs for enterprises, and to a reduction actually in profits and in gains for enterprises. What was also observed by the EIB, we can actually prove this by reading the minutes of the board of directors, but also the studies promoted by the EIB. They pointed out that a large number of big enterprises, which were also the main they were receiving a lot of funds from the World Bank and from the European Investment Bank. The capital intensive and large industries were succeeding in facing the crisis, mainly with rationalizing plans. So they were actually trying to save on labor costs and invest more, for example, in innovation or in rationalizing production. So the main problem was faced actually in this crisis by small and medium enterprises, which were one of the main focus maybe of the Ishman model of unbalanced growth, which did not stress out the importance of capital intensive production and large investment in industrial clusters. And maybe the influence of these economic problems taking place in Italy in this period on the shifting or international model is then proved by the decision from the European Investment Bank from 1968 onwards to operate with global loans. And global loans were actually devoted only to small and medium enterprises. So the idea was that by considering that large investment in capital intensive production and industrial clusters was not proving to be so efficient, also in absorbing a large number of unemployed and underemployed workforce, and giving the consequences of the crisis, which were a great problem for small and medium enterprise in Italy. The idea was that of trying to support a large number of small and medium enterprise, which are the subject maybe of a lot of Ishman theories about development. And the last question was if there is a link from these institutions and the European, the Italian Central Bank in this period. I would say maybe the main link is happened through famous personalities which were operating in these institutions. The first one comes into my mind is Donato Menichella, who was one of the writers of the draft of the law for the Cassa per il Mezzogiorno in 1950. Actually, I think Menichella with also Saraceno and then Formentini were three main personalities, both linked to the Mezzogiorno and to the Italian Central Bank. In some aspects, also Ferdinando Ventriglia is one of them, because he was in the Ministry of Treasury and then the president of his Weimar in the Mezzogiorno. But I would say the debate between, for example, Menichella, Saraceno, and Formentini was an essential debate about the difference between technical and political autonomy of these financial institutions. Because what was pointed out, for example, by Menichella in writing the draft of the draft law of the Cassa per il Mezzogiorno was that a lot of technical autonomy should be devoted to a Cassa per il Mezzogiorno, but then the result was that of having an institution who was mainly politically influenced by government, by the Italian government in that period. And in some aspects, it is the same type of debate which arose in the drafting of the statute for the European Investment Bank, because the Italian delegation, which was represented also by, for example, Giuseppe Di Nardi or Gaetano Martino, which was the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Italy in that period. He also took part to the Messina conference and had great links with SPAC, who was Ministry of Foreign Affairs for Belgium in that period. The main debate was if the European Investment Bank should be a political institution or actually a bank operating in the market as a financial institution. The difference was, as pointed out by the Italian delegation, that a political institution can be influenced in such way, can set a shared regional policy in the European community context, while a bank maybe is only trying to finance some profitable projects, not having an, we can say, a shared commitment to finance a large development programs for underdeveloped areas. And the result was that of having a technical and banking institution like the European Investment Bank. So this also generated a debate in Mezzogiorno about the scarce, we could say, efficiency of EIB financing in Italy, because they were actually demanding for a great political guide for the European Investment Bank. So I would say the link between these institutions, from regional ones to national ones. So, for example, it's very redefine and CIS in Italy at the regional point, then the Italian Central Bank at the national level, and the European Investment Bank at the international level, is a link which took place mainly through personalities and through this idea of the contrast between political autonomy and financial and technical and market, we could say, autonomy for financing institutions, for institutions devoted to finance development in this period.
Excellent. So we have a little bit more than 5 minutes. We have 2 questions on the chat. I was just wondering if anyone else would have a question. Renato, I'm going to read the 2 questions we have on chat, and you can either answer both or choose one to conclude. So we have Gabriela's Massaglia's question: which archival sources did you use for your research? And Bernardo's: to what extent it is possible to assess or determine the influence of organized crime and corruption to allocate regional development funds? Okay, so we'll answer first the question about archival sources. Mainly for the European Investment Bank, the main source is the European University Institute and the Archive of European Union in Florence. I should say in a lot of documents have been and are still in the process of being digitalized. So it is actually not so difficult to access to these documents. A lot of documents need to be digitalized. And so this is why I spent a period of research following as I was awarded a grant by the European University Institute to analyze some of these documents. And a main point I would like to stress out is that for the analysis of global loans, which is this fundamental point in the determining of EIB financing strategy in 1968, there is, I don't know, some work need to be done, because the documents of the reporting on global loans were actually drafted by the Direction Committee of the EIB, and the documents of the Direction Committee have not been, I don't know, delivered to Florence, to the archive, to be made visible and digitalized. So they maybe are in Luxembourg at the European Investment Bank official archive, and I don't know, this would be a step forward in the research to try to analyze these documents and have a specific idea on which were the enterprise, actually the companies financed with global loans. So I would say main sources are European University Institute and the European Investment Bank archive for as it concerned the EIB documents, and then SVIMET's archive was fundamental for my research. A lot of material is also online by the SVIMET, and the Cassa per il Mezzogiorno archive, actually. The archive is in Rome and is easily accessible too. Last question: to what extent it is possible to assess the influence of organized crime? I would say it would be really difficult to assess the influence of organized crime, mainly because from an official point of view, technically speaking, the grant would they were I don't know, granted mainly to the Cassa per il Mezzogiorno and to regional institutions and to some national institutions in Italy. So officially speaking, there is no I don't know, grant to a specific enterprise in which we can assess if this enterprise is mainly linked with organized crime or not. I would say if some influence from organized crime is to be identified, this should be identified from a political point of view. So mainly not from the technical and economical and financial point of view, but if some political choices in Italy as it concerns projects to be presented,
or kind of programs to be implemented in Mezzogiorno, because we should also remember that from 1975 on, the development, the regional development in Italy was devoted to, was one of the main, tasks of regions, and not always by the state. So a main shift in law happened, granting also the regions the task of performing development in Italy. So when the responsibility of writing development programs, of fixing development programs, was devoted mainly to the regions, maybe from the political point of view, some influence, maybe arise or not. But I say, if an influence is to be identified, this should be from the political point of view and not from the technical one, I should say.
Thank you so much, Renato, for this very interesting presentation. Just like to invite you all for our next webinar on December 5th. We're going to welcome Pilar Nogues Marco, who will give the paper Trade Imbalances of Silver Arbitrage, Anglo-Asian Bullion Flows in the Early Modern Period, 1664-1813. Thank you very much, and see you again. Thank you.
And thanks to all of you, and for attention and for the interesting questions you posed. And yeah, hope to be present on 5th of December.